Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Other Spooky Stories, Volume 3, Story Number 1. The house I grew up in was full of weird activity. My earliest memory of this is from when I was about 7. I'm now 23. We lost the house when I was about 16. The house was built in the early 1920s and was a farmhouse. It still exists, but has been completely renovated. Many homes were eventually built around it, putting it in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. I'm not sure the exact order of events, but I will state all the ones I remember. These are the minor things that happened. I will get to the real ghost story after. When we first moved into the house, my sister and I lived in the attic. The light would always turn off on its own. One bad night it happened 3 times. We kept turning it back on, and it would turn off again. We slept with the lights on for a long time after this. I was in middle school, and I would always do my hair in the living room. While I would wait for the flat iron to heat up, I would sit on a chair in the dark and nap until it beeped, ready. Sitting in the dark, eyes closed, I heard my mother, "Christina, Christina, Christina." I said, "What?" And I hear, "Christina." I open my eyes and yell, "What?" to see that I am completely alone. I checked the house, and everyone was still asleep. In my brother's room, they shared, in the corner of the ceiling was a light on the wall. Just a ball of light, exactly like how it would be coming through an eye hole. My brother never knew where it came from, so one day we decided to really figure it out. My brother went and grabbed a chair, and when he went to put his hand over it, the light was still there, under his hand. I know this doesn't sound nearly as clear as I would like it to. We never found an explanation for the weird ball of light. Eventually, my sister and I moved downstairs into an actual bedroom. We had bunk beds, and me being the oldest, I had the top. One night, I woke up and turned over to see and look out the bedroom window, and there he was, a head and neck of a little boy. He was gray, had chubby cheeks, medium hair with bangs over his forehead, and big eyes. I still remember what he looked like. I saw him, and within 2 seconds I turned around and fell straight asleep. I didn't freak out. I didn't scream. I just fell back to sleep. I still think about it all the time. It crosses my mind at least once a week. Eventually, I told my oldest, younger brother. We were on a double date with a friend of mine I was trying to hook him up with. We were out at Applebee's, and I can't remember how the conversation arose, but we got to the topic of the house we grew up in. My brother and I were talking about how it was very spooky and that we hated living there. When he said, "Did I ever tell you about the little boy?" I immediately got goosebumps. I couldn't believe he saw him too. His story is this. He woke up in the middle of the night to grab a drink from the kitchen. He saw that the backyard light was on, so he went to go turn it off. He looked out back and saw a little boy standing in front of the garage, in a winter jacket and scarf. This occurred in the middle of summer. My brother went to wake up my mother, and when they both came back, the boy was gone. I told my brother my story after his, and we both couldn't believe it. Years later, we both admitted to seeing possibly the same boy. I saw this boy twice after, but I'm sure it was out of my mind. Once sleeping in my boyfriend's parents' basement, I woke up, and in a flash I saw a boy's face in front of me. I'm sure I'm just a little crazy, and that I must have been just dreaming about him or something along those lines. The other time was during an episode of sleep paralysis. He was kneeling at the side of my bed, his face getting closer and closer to mine until I came out of it. Another one right out of my mind. I know the difference between things I imagine or hallucinate and what I really saw. What was actually right in front of me. Story number 2. It's June 2018. I remember because it was my grandmother's birthday, and it was a Saturday. So the day for the most part was normal, until sundown. I was talking with my mom over trivial things until I heard the living room door click. The walls of the house are fairly thin, so I can hear even the quietest conversations from any room. I know this door specifically because of a certain distinct click it makes. It's 6 p.m. and I'm excited thinking, well, my sister's family is finally home. So I wait for her to come in until my phone rings. It's my sister and she answers, "Hey dude, what did you guys eat for dinner today? I'm on my way home from work." I'm a bit weirded out from the sound of the door, but brush it off. I mean, hey, I live across the street from a hospital, so I'm used to seeing, hearing, and feeling things. So hours pass, I get up to shower, and I can hear my mom on the phone with my grandma since it's her birthday, and I decide to move to the living room. But my sister stops me and she looks a little shaken. She tells me that she had been watching TV for a bit when she decided to talk to my mom. When she's heading over to the room, she hears someone crying. She assumed maybe our grandma died and is preparing to comfort my mom. As she gets closer, the wailing gets louder. When she opens the door, nothing. My mom was laughing and happily discussing events with grandma. Weirded out, she tells me, and I tell her about the door. I'm Mexican, so ghost stuff is something you grow up hearing. But this stuff sounded kind of like a banshee since she mentioned wailing but didn't say anything at the risk of sounding unhinged. So, two things happened. But I guess again that it was harmless stuff. Mostly denial, I guess. Later, as I was getting ready to sleep, my dad had come home from work 30 minutes before. My sister was out with her boyfriend and my mom was already sleeping in her room. I was lying in bed, and as I read, the time was 11:59. A loud pounding went off. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window thinking someone was knocking on my window, or the door or a truck hit the pothole on my street. Several thoughts ran through my mind. Meanwhile, my mom woke up in a daze. The dogs were going absolutely ballistic and my dad ran outside with the bat he had. I followed behind him and looked outside. I had a feeling it wasn't an actual person because it sounded close to thuds like someone dropping stuff or falling, etc. And the streets were silent. No neighborhood dogs were barking, no cars in sight. For once in the bad side of town, the streets were dead silent. I looked over to my dad. I'd never seen my dad so terrified in his life. He told me he was watching TV when he heard the thuds, and I brought up the topic. Not to sound like a horror cliche, but because only our dogs heard it. The noises had to have come from inside the house. It was no understatement to say that I didn't get any sleep that night. I was home alone all day the next, but I kept wondering. Those banshee legends kept coming to mind. In a panic, I kept thinking, what if someone in the family dies? Of course, everyone in my house brushed it off, despite how shaken everyone was. After that, days went by without incident. Sure enough, 2 weeks exactly from that day, and while we were all sitting in the living room watching novelas, my sister pipes up. "Mom, what's my uncle and my mom's youngest brother, let me call him Jose, daughter's name?" "Emily," my mother and I said simultaneously. She's the middle daughter of two other kids. I last saw her when she was 3, but that was 10 years ago. I always wanted to have a good relationship with them, but because of a nasty divorce, a feud between families ensued. She's dead. Supposedly her mother and her children with their new man were driving back into town when the driver did an illegal U-turn and the car flipped and she died in the hospital later. I don't like jumping to conclusions, but I still think of this stuff a lot. And I do wonder if what we heard was a banshee after all. Next story. Okay, this happened back in the 70s when I was still in a crib, but this memory is burned into my psyche. We lived in an old stone farmhouse built in the 17 or 1800s. The way the rooms were set up were kind of weird by today's standards. My room was connected to my parents' through a side door and the hallway on the second floor. My brother's was just connected to the hallway. There was a grand staircase and a spiral staircase going into the kitchen from my parents' room. Anyhow, this is not necessarily a scary ghost story, but more of a good or kind of kooky one. My brother is the good, while mine is more on the kooky side. One day, my brother was walking down the stairs in his socks. This is down the grand staircase, which had wooden floors. He was always told to do it in shoes since the stairs were bare polished wood. He always kind of wrote off my parents and 10-year-olds tend to do what they want to do. Needless to say, he always went down the stairs in his socks. One day he slipped, but something caught him and put him back upright, probably saving his life. He just stood there kind of dazed and didn't know how to process it. That's all he'll say about it. Now, this is his account. I never saw it. Now is my experience. I was about 3 or 4 at the time. One night, like any other, I was put in my crib. Now, my eyes always played tricks on me when I was young and in the dark. My toys looked like they moved, etc. But one night, my dad stayed with me and told me to tell him when the toys looked like they were moving. I did so, and he'd flick the light on and I'd see things were as they were before. And doing that dispelled my fears of the moving around toys. This was normal for kids, but what happened a couple of nights later would not be dispelled by lights. My window faced the street diagonally, and a street light shone into my window. So here it is. I'm looking out my window one night, and two things shambled up to my window. The best way to describe them were monkeys with more human faces. They had small horns and were hairy, more like a chimpanzee. They didn't terrify me, and what they did next was kind of amusing. The one said in a hushed voice, "Is he awake?" The other replied, "Yeah, think so." They smiled at me and made funny faces. One pulled his mouth to the side and stuck out his tongue, and the other patted the top of his head and used his fingers to flap his lips. They weren't scary and kind of comical, like the Three Stooges. They left, and that was the first and last time I saw them. I just laid there and was kind of confused about it, and then I fell asleep. I asked my mom about the window monkeys, and she kind of blew it off as a dream. But it was no dream. I remember it till this day. This is the kind of thing that you never, ever forget. Next story. First, some backstory. I've always been interested in stories about haunted places. I tend to be a little skeptical. I want hardcore proof. I'm not a fan of orb pictures or things like that. I'm not saying they aren't paranormal, I just don't like pictures that could be explained by an insect. With that being said, I've had creepy things happen at different points in my life. It hasn't been consistent, and there are times that I know without a doubt that it was just my imagination getting cranked up because I freaked myself out watching a movie or reading a story or something like that. I will admit that something is creepy, but then I will try to explain it away as best I can. Exhaust all logical explanations before assuming it's paranormal. But then there's this story. So 10 years ago I graduated from high school and moved away to college. The dorm building I lived in was made up of suites. When you walked in the front door of one, you would have a hallway to the left and a hallway to the right. In the middle of the suite was a living room and a kitchen area. Each side of the suite had its own bathroom area. The shower was at the end of the suite with a glass door, and right next to it was a toilet in its own little room and a counter with a sink and like a little vanity area. Each side also had two separate bedrooms. The girl that was on the same side of the suite as me was really friendly and easy to get along with, so we became good friends very quickly. It wasn't hard to convince her and her fiancé to go ghost hunting with me. Online we found a short list of places in our area that were supposed to be haunted. My roommate did some research and found that a lot of ghost hunting groups would say a prayer before they went into a location and then again before they left. We did this from the beginning. So one of the locations was a playground. There were a lot of rumors online about what made the playground haunted. However, we were never able to corroborate them. We decided to check it out anyway. One night, my roommate and I headed to the playground with her fiancé. There was a gate that would always close at sundown. We stupidly parked right outside the gate. Police in the area knew about the rumors and would routinely patrol it. We climbed over the gate and walked up the hill and then into the playground. It's a creepy place even during the day. It's sort of sunken down, with steps leading to it and surrounded by a rock wall and dense woods on three sides. We were trying to be quiet and just walking around, waiting for something to happen. I remember feeling like I was being watched, but I just chalked it up to being in a place that was supposedly haunted. I don't remember us actually seeing or encountering anything. However, we saw headlights coming down the street that the playground was off of, and we freaked thinking it was a cop. We hightailed it out of there as soon as the car passed, completely forgetting to say a prayer before we left. It wasn't long after that things started happening in our dorm room. It started small. I stayed with a friend on 2 separate occasions, and both times when I came back the next day, my roommate had stories for me. One of the nights she heard what sounded like me kicking the wall, something I did in my sleep sometimes. Twice. That incident was hard to explain because her room was situated between my bedroom and the living area. Our beds were against a shared wall, so she would definitely be able to tell if the sound had come from my room. The other one happened one morning when I was coming in from a class that had been canceled. My roommate asked if I was just coming in. She told me she had heard something in the shower that morning. She had her bedroom door open, and she heard a thump in the shower, like a shampoo bottle falling or something like that. She went to check, figuring I had taken a shower and left something perched weirdly. There was nothing in our shower. We tried to explain that one by the sound having come from the suite next door. However, there is one other thing that happened in our dorm room that we could never explain. I was at my desk one night, playing Neopets on the computer. My roommate had introduced the website to me, and I had a question for her. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walk into the toilet room, but I didn't hear the door shut. I figured she had gone to get tissues or something like that, so I called her name. She didn't answer. I called her name again, louder this time, watching the door for her to pop into my bedroom. I heard her say, "What?" from the living room area of the suite. It's in the opposite direction of the bathroom. If she had walked in there, I would have seen her walk back out. I was freaked out when I stepped out of my bedroom and looked into the bathroom, and no one was there. I walked into the living room, and she was sitting on the couch with her fiancé. I asked her if either of them had gone to the bathroom, and they said they hadn't moved. They had no reason to lie to me about it. Shortly after that, we noted that nothing else had happened. However, a friend of ours who lived on the floor below us and across the hall started having weird things happen in their suite shortly after everything stopped in ours. Sometimes I think that something followed us to our dorm after being at this supposedly haunted location. And, of course, we forgot to pray. Next story. In all my years of having a deep fascination with the paranormal, such as ghosts, aliens, cryptids, and generally anything unexplained, I've only ever had one encounter that I still cannot explain. Due to a roommate bailing out on our lease, I was forced to shack up with a buddy of mine and his wife. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment, but he welcomed me with open arms. They had a toddler that the second room was for, but they said she never went in there and slept with them every night, so it was no problem to take the room for my own. A couple of weeks went by with no incident. However, I did notice the room was a good 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house at all times. No problem. I'll just wrap myself up in blankets. I've always been a heavy sleeper, so it takes me some time to wake up in the morning, as I zombie around for a good hour first. One particular night, I woke out of my sleep and lifted my head up to adjust the pillow. As soon as I did, I noticed something in the far corner of the room. The entire room was lit with moonlight except for one dark silhouette of a human form standing in the corner, staring at me. This figure had no features besides the dark outline of a broad-shouldered man standing or watching. It may have been my grogginess, but he was very tall, as well, with his head almost touching the ceiling. Due to being 90% still asleep, I didn't acknowledge what I had seen and fell back asleep on my newly adjusted pillow. The next morning, as I woke to a much brighter sunlit room, I remembered what I saw last night and the form standing in my room. After a quick glance at the same corner, I shrugged it off as a dream and went on with my life. A couple of months went by with no more shadowy figures staring at me, or at least that I was consciously aware of. I was going to be moving to my new place with my then girlfriend, and we were just waiting for the lease to start. One night, during that wait, I encountered that silhouetted man one more time. The details of this encounter were exactly the same. I awoke, adjusted my pillow, saw the giant shadow staring at me, thought nothing of it, and drifted off to sleep. Once again, to repeat my encounter to the letter, I woke the next morning, remembering what I saw, and quickly darted my eyes to the corner. Okay, there has to be something to this. Moving day arrived, and I decided to tell my buddy, who was gracious enough to let me stay, my two encounters with the silhouette. His reaction surprised me. Yeah, our daughter doesn't go in there and just points to the room saying, scary man, when she gets close to it. He told me as if it was no big deal. After letting out a sarcastic, "Now you tell me," we continued with the move. I've never had a ghost experience before or after that, and is my one little talking point to others who are interested in the same paranormal stories as I am. His presence has always stuck in my mind, though. Next story. I traveled 12 hours by train to visit my sister at her apartment by her college. That night, it was decided that I was going to sleep on the futon downstairs. Her bedroom and her two roommates were upstairs, which I was fine with. I'd stayed with her before and found her apartment rather charming. After having dinner, we got in around 9. We played video games and I ended up dozing off on the couch. As everyone started to get tired and shuffle off to bed, I began to get an uneasy sense in my stomach. When it was just my sister and myself, I told her I wasn't feeling right. She stayed downstairs with me for a while before deciding she wanted to go to bed, which I was completely fine with. Let me add now that I'm normally completely fine with the dark. I like sleeping in the dark. I find it comforting. However, later that night, I found myself feeling emotionally uncomfortable. Not just in my stomach. It dissipated after a few hours, but the time it was there was unnerving. Nothing else happened until the next night. We had gotten back to the apartment after another dinner out, and we were hanging out in the living room trying to decide what to do, to play a game or listen to music, etc. I brought up going to the store to purchase one of my favorite tabletop RPG games, and they decided to get a starter pack of D&D. Long story short, we left and got back around 10:30. When we came in, we got comfortable and then started character planning. It was once again just me and my sister in the room, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow mist across the kitchen. I would like to point out that there is a singular cold spot over the top of my left hand, the hand that I've been clutching my Native American protection beads with. Now, I'm still in her apartment. It's finally 5 a.m. and the time change happened, so I feel like I've been dealing with this for an extra hour, around 2 a.m. I turned to her and said, "Your apartment has a ghost." She scoffed at me. I have a psychic best friend who just told me I'm an empath, and I've had a small past of experiences and a grandmother who sees spirit, so I have believed for a time. We all got back together a minute afterwards and character planned until 12 or 12:30. Then everyone dispersed for bed. I wasn't anxious until after I turned off the lights, which is what's strange for me. I curled up into my blanket and then the heavy discomfort hit me like a brick. I felt a presence in the room. Not malicious, but definitely mischievous. I was highly uncomfortable and I pinpointed the energy coming from the darkest corner of the room at the base of the staircase. I felt, though, as if I were to look over directly into the corner, I was going to be jumped. A few minutes later, a silver streak shot out past me and into the wall. Not even a second later, someone upstairs opened their bedroom door, turned on the light, which shone on the foot of the stairs, and used the restroom. I felt the presence in the room dissipate and was highly relieved. It was short-lived because as soon as a roommate returned to their room and shut the door, discomfort got worse than before. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw an approximately 3-foot gray figure run across the living room twice. The first time I figured it was just a trick of my eyes, but at the second sight, I jumped up and turned on the light. Granted, I tried to debunk these things, but having not come to a plausible explanation, all the sounds, yes, I wrote them off to mice, neighbors, roommates shuffling their beds, or walking around in the room, odd-sounding cars outside and wind. The feelings and things I've seen, still trying to work that out. I left the light on for a few hours before feeling calm enough to try to turn it off and sleep. I couldn't, so I was staring at my laptop screen, distracting myself. Shortly after the light was off, I was looking at character sheets. I felt sick and felt a headache coming on. I figured it was from stress. Shortly after that, a portion of my screen glitched blue and I saw my sister walk behind my computer. I felt immense warmth off of her as she passed. I called out to her and then an intense feeling of "this is wrong" came over me. I immediately flipped my computer upside down backwards to shine light on her, and no one was there. I called her name once more as I jumped up to switch on the lights. I turned around after they were on and called her twice more. She was not downstairs at all, but upstairs in bed, along with both of her roommates. I would have heard the stairs. The only door into the apartment was next to my spot. If someone had broken the lock and entered, I would have known. Who walked by me? I was shaking like a leaf, which is not something I do, and tears were uncontrollably welling up in my eyes. I don't think they were malicious, but I had never seen anything like this. I was 19 years old, and I texted my mom, who's a non-believer, freaking out. 18 or 20 minutes later, my sister, who's 6 feet, weighs about 175 pounds, comes downstairs, and this time I heard her clearly, and asked me why I had the light on. I asked her if she was down here a few minutes ago, though it would have been impossible. She said no, she was asleep, and had just woken up to use the toilet. I started tearing up and told her house had a serious manifestation of a ghost in it. She scoffed at me and left. I felt like an utter idiot. And I'm not going to be mocked by my family big time, but I know what I felt and saw. I didn't turn off that light again in that apartment. Never. Not until I left. And for good measure, I burned some sage. Next story. This is a true story that occurred in Bridgeport, Connecticut about poltergeist activity. This is one of the most asked about cases, the Lindley Street haunting. I remember as a young man all the crowds that gathered outside of the police line that day. I was one of them pushing through the crowds to get to Ed and Lorraine. At that point, Lorraine spotted me in the crowd and came right over and said, "What are you doing here?" I had said to Lorraine, "I'd like to go into the haunted house to see the furniture move and to see the cat speak." Ed saw Lorraine and I speaking and came over to see what was going on at that point. They decided that I was too young to be involved with a case of that magnitude. Little did I know that I would be involved with so many of their cases in the future. I can tell you this, I saw enough witnesses and people coming in and out of that home with amazing stories of the Lindley Street haunting. The Gooden family had moved to the one-story, four-room house about 1960. It had been built 60 years before, supposedly for the child of a Bridgeport shirt manufacturer. Gerald Gooden was described in the seminary student's report as a factory worker at Harvey Hubble. Laura Gooden was described as high-strung, devout Roman Catholic. Both were said to be protective of young Marcia, whom they adopted after the death of their only son. They walked her to school in the morning and rarely let her leave the house alone. Marcia was said to be an unhappy child, ostracized in school. She was also described as a deceitful youngster with an unhealthy interest in the occult, according to reports. Her only friend reportedly was her orange and white cat, Sam. In the fall of 1974, Sam went to a veterinary hospital for an operation. When he returned home, he supposedly began acting strangely as if he were trying to talk. Later, Gerald Gooden claimed the cat would kick at the basement door, yelling, "Let me out, you dirty Frenchman, you dirty Greek!" The banging noises in the house had started about 2 years after Marcia was adopted in the late 1960s, but it was around December 1973 the Goodens claimed that the unexplained activities began in earnest. The Warrens, who had a reputation for investigating the unexplained and had published books on everything from ghosts to werewolves, claimed to have witnessed the moving furniture and destruction of religious objects. They said it was Marcia's unhappiness that caused the disturbances. It may have been a combination, they said, of a psychic disturbance caused by her angry aura and by evil spirits attracted by that aura. It was something inhuman, Ed Warren said. As far as we're concerned, those were evil spirits in that house. It's November 1974. The Warrens are called in by the Gooden family to investigate a malevolent force that had been terrorizing the family and home. Furniture was being thrown, family members injured, even the family cat was speaking ethnic slurs. Things were flying around in the front room when we went in there, Gerald Gooden told a radio station, describing events of Sunday, November 24th, 1974. Whatever it was acting like a demented person, and I felt I had to get my family out of the house. By November 26, the police superintendent said the supposed haunted was a hoax by the troubled Marcia and fed by the parents eager to cash in on her newfound fame. Whatever it was, it made national headlines, drew crowds of onlookers, and went on to become a legend that causes goosebumps till today. A Bridgeport patrolman responded to Trouble Unknown call to the Gooden house that November Sunday. When I went to the door, the lady came to the door. I asked, "What's the problem?" recalled the patrolman, now a sergeant. She was crying and pointed. The lady was Laura Gooden. She pointed to a living room so disheveled that it looked as if someone had thrown the furnishings about. I asked her if she had been burglarized. She replied, "No, this is always going on." Thinking the dreadful pounding noises that echoed through the home for years and the moving objects might be caused by a settling of the house, the police called in the fire department, but fire officials and the city engineer found no structural problems and ruled out the possibility of renovation work at the nearby St. Vincent's Medical Center as causing the problem. The Reverend Edward Doyle of St. Patrick's Church, then the fire department chaplain, blessed the house. He later stated at the time of the blessing he saw nothing that led him to believe evil spirits were present, but others on the scene saw things they couldn't believe. The then fire chief, John Gleason, said his men witnessed dinner plates rattling, pictures jumping off the wall, a television set falling over, and a heavy leather chair jumping at least 6 inches off the floor. A 22-page report prepared a year later by a seminary student quotes the Bridgeport police records as saying officers saw the refrigerator rise about 6 inches off the floor. A 21-inch portable television rose off a table and rotated, and objects on the shelves vibrated and fell to the floor. They also allegedly saw a lounge chair that Marcia was sitting in move rapidly backwards and overturn. But when officers tried to move the chair, it wouldn't budge. Also in front of onlookers, a plastic crucifix exploded from the wall. Ed and Lorraine Warren of Monroe, famed paranormal researchers, still have the pieces in a small box in their home. Never in my life did I ever see so many police officers get down on their knees and ask for a priest's blessing as in the Gooden home, Lorraine Warren's recalled. They were really at God's mercy in that house, and they knew it. Tim Quinn had worked as a reporter for just a few years when he was sent to cover the haunting on Lindley Street. First, he saw the crowds. Then police told him a religious rite was going on inside the house. And then the Warrens came out. Then he went in. The one thing he remembered seeing is a leather chair sitting on the kind of thin rug that leaves a light mark when you brush across it or step on it. Suddenly, the back went down and the chair moved a few feet. He said, but there were no marks on the carpet from the runners underneath the chair. He called it strange, eerie, and underscored by something a firefighter said to him. People shouldn't be afraid of this, Quinn said, the firefighter told him. Because if there is a devil, then that means there must be a God, and there must be an afterlife. When word leaked that strange occurrences were going on in the house, the public, their interest piqued by the devil possession movie The Exorcist, began crowding around. Soon traffic was tied up for blocks. Police had to cordon off the street and even arrested some gawkers who refused to leave. Media around the world wanted to know about Bridgeport's demons. The Goodens, according to witnesses, ate up the publicity like popcorn. They invited reporters into the house and were even guests on Tiny Markle's radio show. I think the little girl was clearly very happy with the attention, and I get the feeling so were her parents, Quinn said. I don't think they wanted this to end, but end it did, quite abruptly, with an announcement on November 26 by then police Superintendent Walsh that the haunting was a hoax perpetrated by the young girl. Walsh said Marcia confessed to making the furniture move when people's attention was diverted and making the cat talk through ventriloquism. After Walsh's announcement, the crowd dispersed and the frenzy died down. Those who believed in ghosts complained Walsh was less interested in finding the truth than killing the publicity. I know the things that I saw and the things that police saw in my presence, and it was real, said the Reverend Bill Charbonneau, who taught a course in the occult at St. Joseph's College in West Hartford, Connecticut. It certainly was not explicable in normal terms. Charbonneau said he studied the paranormal at a university in Rome and was called upon many times as an exorcist. While at the Gooden house, he said he was sitting with young Marcia when she screamed at him to turn around. Just then, the bureau slid rapidly from one side of the room to another, with no one having touched it. Later, while alone in the basement of the house, he heard an ugly voice singing Christmas carols. He found the voice coming from Sam the cat. Whatever was happening, Charbonneau said, it was centered around Marcia, because she could sense the occurrences as they were about to happen. But she definitely did not create them, he said. It wasn't a hoax. It definitely wasn't a hoax, he said. In terms of whether it was poltergeist activity or whatever it was causing it, I was thrown out of the city before I could do anything about it. He said Walsh threatened him with arrest if he ever came back to Bridgeport. The house on Lindley Street today sits next to a condominium complex. It's weathered down, and yellow paint is peeling, and the lawn unkempt. Laura and Gerald Gooden both have died, and Marcia Gooden, who would be 34, could not be located. Most of those contacted that were involved with the case said the bizarre experience never really left their minds. The Warrens called it one of the most famous, well-documented poltergeist cases in history, and rated it a 10 on a 1 to 10 scale of supernatural things they had seen in their 50 years of experience.